Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional and a podcast host from Toulouse, France, Suzie Lewis. Suzie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really, really delighted to be here.
Thank you. Suzie is the Managing Director, Transform for Value, and is focused on driving international transformation projects and preparing business leaders and employees for change. She's the podcast host of a podcast titled Let's Talk Transformation, and she has recently launched her innovative Human Systems Practitioner program. So, Suzie, before we talk about transformation, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
Okay, well, back to transformation, essentially. But I think hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? And there's always been driving forces, which I can see throughout my journey when I look back. You know, I'm very values and purpose driven. I'm fascinated by people and potential. I love sharing knowledge, and I'm curious to get creative. And I think the biggest thing about transformation is it's always about something bigger than us, so bigger than me.
Right.
And I first moved countries to France, where I ended up staying, to do my master's degree, which I did in cultural identity and the complexity of cultural identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I went on to use that foundation in business. So I spent 20 years in a large aeronautical organization where I started as a lean expert on the supply chain,
Mm-hmm.
looking at agile flow, parts on a product line, but quite quickly it came to be about how other people reacted to it and leadership. I went into HR for 10 or 12 years, looking at recruitment, operational HR, diversity, inclusion, talent management, always around potential, fairness, leadership, and what people were doing. And then I helped set up the Internal Leadership University, the definition of what leadership do we need for tomorrow, as the world is massively changing, which is accelerated by digital a lot. So then I moved into digital, looking at the human-centered strategy around digital transformation and how do you create sustainable change. And just a small anecdote, I love hiking. I'm quite a sporty person. And, you know, I live in Toulouse, which is near the mountains. And I was at the top of a mountain and just looking in awe at the other mountains and thinking as you do. And it came to me that I'd built a career almost unintentionally on something I was massively passionate about, and that there was a bigger step for me on that path. And that bigger step was about having more impact and seeing different organizations and populations. So I stepped out of the corporate environment and founded my own business, as you said, Transform for Value. It's in the title, about the value of people and that they bring to business. And also my podcast, Let's Talk Transformation, with a view to operationalizing what I'd learned in the organization and from my experiences, and also sharing and putting that at the service of larger communities. So that was 6 years ago. And part of that was launching my Human Systems Practitioner program, because it is all about the human systems for me of an organization, an ecosystem, a community. It's about that layer and how we manage it or not. So that's basically my journey to date.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And it's often been said, you know, that if your passion becomes your career, then you're probably one of the luckiest people going.
And I feel lucky. I must admit, I feel lucky.
That. Wonderful. So, Suzie, let's talk about transformation and driving international transformation projects. What, in your view, are some of the key components of a successful international transformation project?
I mean, I think it starts with, well, clearly people, but understanding the context. You have to meet people and systems where they're at. So taking the time to look at what the landscape looks like currently, what we're dealing with, what the constraints are, and how the people are feeling about that. Before moving into looking at what different tool we're putting in or what different processes we're changing. So it's that whole understanding of context, which is key. Understanding how people feel about that context currently. So their fears, but also their hopes and their curiosity. And then it's awareness, essentially. And then moving them into understanding. So by understanding, I mean somewhere where I feel safe enough to pilot something, to have a go at it. So that's the first part, the awareness part and the context part. The second part for me would be not doing a big bang. You know, start small. Humans don't like change. There are two constants in this world, aren't there? Change and human reaction to change. That never changes.
Right.
So humans don't like change. So we have to take that on board when we look at how we can put things in place. So big bangs, and this is speaking from experience, do not work. Small iterative programs do work a lot better. Partly because it allows people to get ready for the change, and partly because it allows people to start having a more adaptive mindset around what is actually going on in the transformation. Yeah.
Well said. And what are some of the common pitfalls you have seen in an international transformation project, and how can some of these pitfalls be avoided?
So I'm going to come back to some of what I've just said, but some of the pitfalls are, we need to do it. We need to do it quickly. We need to deliver it quickly. We'll just do a one size fits all. And transformation is never quick, and it's never easy, and it's never about one size fits all. But it can be incredibly effective in small, manageable parts. So splitting it up into small, manageable parts, but also right from the beginning, looking at what we need to accompany that change or transformation. And I'm not just talking about training and communication, although that's a big part of it, but what do we need to do right from the beginning to understand where people are at? Because otherwise we're just imposing things on trying to shoehorn things into a system. If I look at change and Robert Keegan's model of the different types of change, you have technical challenges, process tool, technology, and adaptive challenges. And transformation is an adaptive challenge, i.e. skills, mindset, ways of working, ways of thinking. And often we come at it with a technical solution, which is a pitfall of wanting to go quickly. And it's also more comfortable because it's tangible and we can touch it. So I think it's people, process, technology in that order. And the pitfall is to do it the other way around, I think.
Yeah, I understand. And what would you say are some of the key skills needed for leaders to drive such transformation?
Can we start with listening? I mean, actively listening, not only to their people, but also to themselves and to the system. Because there is a lot going on in systems, and there are various layers. You know, there's the cognitive layer, there's the emotional layer, there's the cultural layer. We need to listen to all those layers. So, you know, awareness of, if I come to Goleman's definition of emotional intelligence, a lot of it is in there. You know, it's around my self-awareness. So, you know, what are my mental models? How do I react to these things? So how do I think and how do I act? And therefore, how do I interact with my team and the rest of the organization, which is my definition of culture? You know, how do we think, act, and interact? So there's that. And that takes a skill of holding multiple perspectives, accepting other people's ideas, and listening to understand as opposed to listening to reply. So I think, you know, all of those skills, including emotional regulation, so regulating my emotions, but also being able to have the empathy to help regulate the conditions for the emotions of others, because you can't regulate others' emotions, but you can create the conditions for that regulation to happen. So I think all of those things are skills for leaders for this adaptive environment. For me, it's inclusive leadership, because I don't think you can have transformation without conscious inclusion, because that's the mindset, and it's the same for innovation. So that's the mindset we need that will allow people to express themselves, express different ideas, and to allow challenge to be healthy enough for it to come to different ways of being, and to actually allow change to happen. Or should I say that's my belief?
No, I agree completely. And how do you help leaders to align digital ecosystems with human values when it comes to transformation?
And that is the heart of today's discussion around transformation for me. It's how do you bridge this gap between digital and human? And I think we're going to come back to the human systems of an organization, because digital enables lots and lots and lots of things. If we understand how to use those levers. So let's take collaboration, for example. all the tools we all use now, thank you, COVID, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Slack, other platforms where we can basically collaborate without actually being next to each other, allows us to collaborate a lot more quickly and a lot more efficiently in terms of getting things done. It doesn't necessarily mean we're collaborating more efficiently in terms of human connection, although it is possible, of course. We are a living proof in this podcast. It is possible to connect on a human connection across the screen, but it's quite easy to get transactional. So I think the first thing is to understand the human systems of what we're dealing with in the digital environment. And the second thing, particularly as a leader, is to ask ourselves, okay, as a leader, my job is to create the conditions for quality decision-making to happen and for people to thrive. So what can digital enable? Not what tools do we need? What can digital enable in terms of enhancing human collaboration or taking away or automating some of the other tasks so that we can spend more time in the space of human connection? Because that's what's going to keep us relevant in a digital age. And that also takes quite a lot of humility to step back and say, I'm not quite sure, but let's have a look at these tools and what they mean. Let's take generative AI. I mean, nobody knows exactly how it's going to progress, but we are working with it. And that means we have to accept that there are a certain amount of unknowns. So I think to come back to your question around mindset and pitfalls, you can't know how a transformation project is going to go. You can guide people through it, and you can have an ambition and a vision, and you can take people with you on that, but they will all have to adapt along the way. And I think digital will bring new opportunities because the speed of digital change is massively different from the speed of human change, of course. So I see that as a huge opportunity to get curious about, as we go through a year of transformation, there may be opportunities and tools that are coming into the market that digital will provide and enable things that I never thought it would. So I think it's always keeping that curiosity as opposed to being scared of what digital will bring in terms of what it does for visibility of data, what it does for processes in organizations, the end-to-end visibility data brings on processes, and organizational design doesn't reflect that yet. I like to say yet. So, it's this whole discussion around the organizational design of more fluid organizations. How do you do that? And platform-based models allow data-driven decision-making to happen, whether we're comfortable with it or not. So it's getting comfortable with feeling a little bit uncomfortable, I think, is the bottom line, and just being open to the opportunities that digital can bring.
Well said. And Suzie, do you face any cross-cultural challenges in a transformation project? And if so, how do you tackle them?
So yes is the answer to that. I've run huge transversal transformation projects across lots of different countries. But even smaller transformation projects, culture is always key. Now, when I say culture, we have national culture, of course, which brings with it different ways of communicating different perceptions of hierarchy, different perceptions of time, and lots of other things that means you have a different lens from the start. Now, if I don't understand your lens, we could quite easily get into a space of misunderstanding. And if we're not listening actively, then that could cause some issues. So you have the national culture layer. You then have the organizational culture layer. So the way we work around it, which is inherent to an organization, which evolves with an organization, but it is often customized to the different regions and the different sites. So you have these layers that you need to understand and take account of so that a compromise can be found if that's appropriate, or so that you can deliver things, your message, your training, or even the way you run your team in a way that's going to allow those different cultures to understand each other first and to work together for high performance. I mean, no team is high performing 100% of the time, but taking into account before you speak to someone what they may be feeling culturally, if they feel included or excluded, it's incredibly important. And for me, cross-cultural management and understanding is one of the biggest skills in adaptive leadership and inclusive leadership, because the world is getting more interconnected, which is great, but it brings with it quite a lot of complexity, and cultural complexity is one of those things.
Absolutely. So let's now talk a little bit about you also your work in supporting business leaders and preparing them for change. What, in your view, are some of the common challenges leaders face during times of change?
So human challenges is the short answer to that, but I think they face the challenge of having to deliver quickly and deliver business results and the pressure of that, with having to also manage human reactions to change within their team, within their organization. So that's two very different speeds being put into the same environment, which can create quite a lot of pressure. So I come back to, how does one deal with pressure? And we're coming back to self-awareness and understanding of how I react to things,
right,
so that they can create the conditions for those conversations to be had. Because when we're pressured or tired or nervous, we revert to type, i.e. fight or flight in brain terms, which means that we go into our reactive tendencies that are based on our unconscious belief system, if you like. So I think understanding their team, and by understanding their team, I mean understanding what cultures they have in there, what different diversities they have in there, what culture they're trying to create, and opening a space of dialogue where people can speak up freely. And, psychological safety, I'm a big fan of Amy Edmondson's research and work and around psychological safety, but also around the permission to fail and intelligent failures. So I think all these things need to be role modeled by the leaders for permission to be given for the team to act in a certain way. And they need to be equipped to have difficult conversations.
Well said.
Because change is difficult. And there are ways we can equip ourselves not to feel comfortable, because I don't think one ever feels comfortable with a difficult conversation. You never think, oh, yes, I'm going to have a difficult conversation. But you can get comfortable with the feeling of, I'm not that comfortable, but I know I'm equipped to receive whatever that person is going to say and to react to it in an appropriate way.
That's right. And as you said a few minutes back, that most human beings don't like change. In fact, most of us like status quo, maybe status quo ante. My question to you, Suzie, is what role does emotional intelligence play in leading change?
I think emotional intelligence allows us to, I'm going to use the metaphor of a jigsaw puzzle. It allows us to take the bits of the jigsaw puzzle apart and to put them back together. So to dare to break the big picture and split it up into component parts. So, for me, the 4 building blocks of creating an inclusive environment for transformation are empathy, psychological safety, co-responsibility, and therefore collective vision. So if I start with that, this is run by emotional intelligence skills. So I can read the emotional layer of my team. I can regulate my own emotions. I understand what motivates my team and what doesn't. I notice when people are stressed, and I don't just notice it and carry on. I notice it, ask them, and we together find a way of either dealing with that or at least having a conversation around what that could look like. So, which is the social skills part of Daniel Goleman's discussion around emotional intelligence. And I think you can then break that down into different individual activities like active listening, feedback, holding different types of conversations, different types of thinking. It's what innovation methodology and design thinking methodology does for us. You always start with empathy. You always start from a place of humility and distance from yourself of, okay, let's empathize with the user. What are his or her needs? And only then do we come back to, let's define the problem, and then let's think about possible solutions. So I think businesses, for very good reasons, are all driven by results, and they're very fast-paced delivery environments, which is great, but it keeps us in that side of our brain and that way of thinking and being where we don't have time, or should I say that's what we tell ourselves, we don't have time to have a longer conversation. So my invitation would be to make that time. And I think the higher you go in terms of leadership, the more time you need to make for those type of conversations.
Well said. And how can leaders foster a culture of collaboration and inclusivity when it comes to transformation?
I mean, I think it comes to creating new habits and being explicit about that. But it starts with the self-awareness piece. So, you know, what are my biases? Why do I react in the way I do? And that's almost before I get into the leadership space. You know, this is okay. I need to know myself, because leadership at the end of the day, it's not about me, it's about the others. So I need to understand my own bias so that I can help other people have that conversation around something, other biases that people may be seeing, but not just to say, oh, by the way, that's bias, because unconscious bias discussions, once it's conscious, that's where the work starts. So I think, you know, creating that space where people can actually ask their questions, where they're listened to, where they're heard. I think putting in place explicit accountabilities and expectations, both individual and collective, around what the team is there to do and what the expectations are. I think encouraging healthy challenge, and as a leader, depending on the work culture, but as a leader, it's always about role modeling and giving permission. So it's okay for me to say I don't know. It's okay for me to ask my team for something that I don't have the answer to. It's okay for us to try iteratively and fail, because if you don't fail, you don't learn. You know, I've never seen a transformation with 0 failures in it, because that's not how transformation happens. But this perfection in the organization of we've got to get it right, we've got to get it right, we need to know. So it's choosing learning over knowing. And that can be deployed in various different ways. And it can be as simple as a check-in at the beginning of the meeting, or more deliberate, as in once a month in our team away day, we will have 20 minutes dedicated to how we develop our team and our team dynamic. But it needs to be explicit, it needs to be clear, and it needs to be a place where everybody's voice can be heard. So I think that's really, really important, and where people can say either I don't understand, I don't quite follow you, or I don't agree with you, which is also fine. You know, when I'm in a team and there's 0 disagreement, there's an issue. Somebody isn't speaking up, because we're never 100% unanimously agreed on things, because humans are unique, aren't they? So I think that's a flag for leaders. If there's never any dissent in your team, then there's something wrong.
Well said. Well said. So, Suzie, I have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about your innovative program, which is like for human systems, your human systems practitioner program.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love this topic, so stop me if you have to. But when I stepped out of the organization I used to work in, I'd met so many brilliant people, and we'd done so much brilliant stuff together by connecting people who wanted to make change, who were like-minded but did it really differently, which was so interesting and so beneficial for the organization. And it was all about building relationships differently and understanding that layer of the systems they worked in. So outside of the processes, the policies, and what they incentivize or not, about how does that make people feel, and how can we use that as levers to create sustainable transformation. And therefore, I had lots of experience and ideas. And as I stepped out, I thought, I want to make a model out of this, because I want to give it back to organizations, part of what I wish I'd known, and part of, you know, these things move very quickly in terms of how organizations are designed, especially after COVID with a hybrid model, what challenges are coming up. So I made it into 3 different areas around understanding your inner and outer system, and looking at what do you need for deliberately developmental leadership, what do you need for systemic leadership, both individually and also collectively, and then how do you take people with you? So how do you enact that in the system so that it becomes the way we do things around here? And the idea it's a mix of experience, insights, but also tools and approaches for people to be able to go and do that in their respective organizations. And there's a community of practice attached to it, which means that we go on sharing and learning. And actually, it's an agilely constructed program, in the fact that after each cohort and the feedback, I tweak the design and I tweak the contents. So it's really what I think is at the heart of transformation, which is the human systems of an organization. And lots of these tools or understanding exists already in organizations, but they haven't been brought together in a holistic understanding of how you affect change across a system, whether that's a team, two teams, a department, or an organization. So, and I just think there is so much wisdom out there in organizations that we don't necessarily hear unless you go and ask for it. So for all those reasons, I put that together during COVID, also as a way to have more impact. And to, you know, the global platforms we have now and the fact that we can do so much via Zoom or Microsoft Teams or virtually, essentially, it gives us a lot more scope to have huge amounts of impact, which is really important for me in terms of why I do what I do.
Well said. And I'm going to ask you one last question. You also coach leaders.
Yeah.
How do you coach leaders to balance data-driven decision-making with empathy and human connection?
I think it's one of the things the questions I get the most. And I think that's about understanding what data decision-making means in your organization, what it's bringing, and what it's bringing that's making you nervous. Because only then can you coach your team into a different positioning around data-driven decision-making. If I come back to the platform-based models that data allow us to do, where you have a single repository and you have end-to-end processes and the data flows across it with no intervention from anyone, and it gives you the data that you're asking for. And if you need to take that straight to the top, you can't look, you know, you can't change that. And I think there's quite a lot of nervousness around not knowing every single part of that data before it comes out and you take it wherever you take it. So I think it's around 2 or 3 things, and I've actually put this in place. It's about understanding data. What does it mean, and what is it bringing that's different from the way we used to report, take decisions, etc.
Right.
And how have I reacted to that at my level? Which means that I'm going to understand what's good about it, what makes me nervous. And that's the empathy part. And therefore, I can help other people have a conversation, because coaching isn't about giving solutions. For me, coaching is about holding a space where people can find different perspectives and maybe a different solution. But you can certainly share how you feel about things, but you will then have your idea of where maybe they're feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And maybe you might be completely wrong and they'll give you a completely different area of why they're nervous about it. But to be able to have that conversation of why they're nervous about it, you need to have created that space. And to create that space, just moving backwards, you need to have had that conversation with yourself around data-driven, which isn't going away. So ignoring it is just not going to work, either for leadership or for competitive advantage of business. That is, you know, and we're now putting generative AI on top of it and other such, you know, quantum computing. And so data-driven is the way we're going, whether we like it or not. So my invitation would be to understand it, but also to understand why it's making you nervous.
Correct.
And therefore, you have a different space from which to talk to somebody else.
Great response. And on that note, Suzie, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. I think we had an amazing conversation on transformation. I learned many things from you on transformation and all the things that go into building a successful transformation project. Thank you also for speaking to me about change for business leaders and how you support all of them. And finally, thank you for talking to me about your Human Systems Practitioner program.
Thank you for having me on the show. Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.